Hello BookTube, welcome to the Literary Buffet. My name is Louis, and today, like many other booktubers, I will be sharing my 2026 TBR list. Steve Donahue yesterday in one of his videos did mention that he's watching and judging all the 2026 TBR videos that are being created all over the place right now. So doing a video like this after Steve's announcement that he will be judging us is like having the eye of Sauron hovering above one. But anyway, I will persevere like Frodo and do this video anyway. And actually, I do have a reason, an additional reason why I'm doing this video, which is that for me, my end of the year holidays have now started. I'll be traveling to my family in a few days. And so before I do that, I actually have been thinking about which books I wanted to take with me to read over the kind of like Christmas and New Year holiday. After having read quite a few long books, I decided to just pick some smaller books, shorter books for these next few weeks. Nothing too heavy, nothing too serious, especially after having read Mason and Dixon and currently a book that I will show you soon on the Second World War. I feel like I need something a bit lighter for the year end. But while I was doing so, I kind of like also picked here and there a few books that caught my fancy and that I feel like, oh, this, you always wanted to read this book. Maybe 2026 is the time to read it. And so I have this huge pile. Actually, I have like 6 piles of books next to me. Certainly over ambitious for 2026. But anyway, just to give you a little view of what might catch my fancy in 2026. But of course, you know, who knows what I will indeed be reading in the next year. Maybe my fancy moves somewhere else and I will read completely different books, but so be it. I think there's no, nobody is forcing me to read this or that book. I'll just read whatever I want at a given time. Anyway, I'll start maybe by showing you a few books that I'm either still reading or that I half DNF'd, but they're like not quite dead yet. So they're in this zombie state where I might pick them up at some point and continue or finish reading them. So first of all, the one I'm currently reading and hopefully finishing soon is The Wages of Destruction, The Making and Breaking of the Nazi Economy by Adam Tooze. So an economic history of the Third Reich. Very interesting, very in-depth. Really tells the history of the Second World War from a completely different perspective. One that's seldomly shared, seldomly explained in history books. So a very interesting read, to be honest. So I can definitely recommend it. I did show his other book, a book that he wrote subsequently, but that chronologically comes before, which is The Deluge, history of the economic. So it's an economic history of the First World War, especially the end of the First World War, and then the Treaty of Versailles and all the implications thereof. And so this one here kind of like neatly follows, at least chronologically, the other one. Then the one that I might finish over Christmas, just because there's really not very much left, is by José Saramago, the Portuguese Nobel Prize winner. And this is the history of the Siege of Lisbon. And it's one that I really don't particularly like. That's why I've been kind of like, on and off reading it on and off for months now. Since there's so little to go, I will probably just, take it to my parents' place and finish it and then be done with it. If you would like, or if you would like to read Saramago, don't start with this one. There are several that are much better. Blindness, which is his most famous, definitely worth it. What's it called? I think in English it's called Balthazar and Blimunda, In Portuguese, it has another name. So that one also definitely worth it. And in Portuguese, that one is called Memorial do Convento. And then the third one I would recommend is The Gospel According to Jesus Christ, which is also very good. So that's Saramago. And then another one that I've been kind of like reading forever. It's Journey to the West. So this is volume 2 out of 4. So it's one of those Chinese classics that's very sprawling, very, very long. In contrast to some of the others that I liked, so I loved the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. I loved the Dream of the Red Chamber. That one I read like, you know, in the breeze, like all the 4 volumes in one go. This one I've been struggling with. I've probably started it 2 years ago, and I'm kind of like reading a few chapters here and then, which you can actually do with Journey to the West because it's quite episodic. So they meet some demon, and then for several chapters, then they fight that demon. There's divinities that come to help them, etc. And so I will kind of like read one of those episodes of several chapters and then kind of like give up again. But anyway, so I might actually try to continue reading Journey to the West. I must say that the start of Journey to the West, so the first few chapters, the intro chapters, which focus on the Monkey King, they're really great. And the Monkey King is definitely the character that drives this whole novel forward. So it's no wonder that's such an iconic figure in Chinese literature and then in Chinese culture in general. You see Monkey Kong things everywhere in China. But the novel itself, it's a little bit tedious to get through, in my opinion. So that's what I'm currently reading, or kind of like half reading, half zombie reading. So now going to the pile of books that I might or might not read in 2026, amongst the hundreds of books that I have to potentially read. I kind of like clustered them according to languages or regions. And I realized that I clustered them maybe not in the best way, but anyway, we'll get through it. So let's start maybe with stuff written in English. This one that I'll definitely take to Luxembourg because it's quite short. And I think it's not like hyper complex to read, at least, so from the language. And that's Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. I don't think I need to say a lot about it. It's one of, it's a cult booktube book. Then an oldie but a goodie, Lovecraft. These are some collected tales from Lovecraft. I've read most of them ages ago, most of them in French. So actually reading them in English would be something I'd like to do. Probably sticking to the iconic ones, the ones focusing on Cthulhu. Not sure I'll do it for Christmas, although maybe. Then this, so I'm not reading the whole thing here, but so this is my box set of Ursula K. Le Guin's Finnish novels by the Library of America. I've read The Dispossessed last year, I think, and I quite liked it. And so I think so in 2026, I'll probably tackle the other famous novel from Ursula K. Le Guin, The Left Hand of Darkness. And then something from Australia, actually, non-fiction book. I don't know exactly where I came across it. I think it might have been on BookTube somewhere, or in some kind of online magazine. I don't know. It's called Dark Emu, Aboriginal Australia and the Birth of Agriculture. And so this is basically a book where kind of like an archaeologist, so it's a seminal book, they say here, where they, so Bruce Pascoe analyzes what actually the Aboriginal people of Australia left as archaeological traces, and shows that actually, well, they were not just, primitive in quotation mark nomads that or hunter-gatherers, but that instead they did have some form of agriculture, of fishing and pisciculture or whatever you call that. And apparently this was kind of like a revolution when it was published in Australia. So I don't know. I mean, if you're Australian, tell me whether it's right or not, because it turned around this mindset that Aboriginal, or that Australia before the white settlers came was this land without any agriculture or anything whatsoever. Anyway, so nothing too long, but it does have like some pictures of some archaeological sites that are analyzed. So here, for instance, this is what I meant. So there's like some fish traps in some river in Australia. Anyway, so that's dark emu. Then moving on to literature or stuff written in French. First of all, probably try to read a classic on French literature. I'm kind of like tending towards Racine. So Racine is a playwright, one of the big playwrights of French literature. So I think everybody knows Molière, but he wrote comedies. Racine and Corneille were the two famous ones that wrote tragedies around that time. So Racine basically lived in the super long reign of Louis XIV, and some of the plays that are here are Andromaque. I think that one is quite famous. What else? Berenice, Britannicus, Phèdre, I think Phèdre, so that's a famous one of him, and a few others. Bayazet, I won't read all of them, but I'll probably try to read a couple of them just to get a feel for the theater under Louis XIV. Then to something much more contemporaneous. So this is by Laurent Binet, Civilizations, which was published a few years ago, and was quite a success in France. He has written a few books since. Civilizations is basically a counterfactual history where he imagines the Incas invading Europe, and so there's basically the various episodes of what is it? Eric the Red, who travels to southern America, Columbus, who doesn't discover America, and then the Incas that discover Europe. So I'm quite interested in reading this. I like alternative history and counterfactual history, so quite looking forward to that one. Then not quite so contemporary. So this is Marguerite Yourcenar. She's most famous for the Memoirs of Hadrian, which is magnificent, and if you haven't read it, I absolutely recommend it. This is her other famous novel. It's in French called L'œuvre au noir. I had to check what it's called in English. So in English, it's apparently called The Abyss, or Zeno of Bruges. So it's basically a medieval story, kind of like on the cusp between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So that's where it takes place. And indeed, this is a Flemish, or like an excerpt of a Flemish painting that you can see on the cover. So I really like her writing in Memoirs of Hadrian. It's just fabulous. For me, in French, she's like one of the best prose writers that I've come across. And then one that I came across in one of these Donohue's year-end lists, so one of his top 10 lists, and I was quite surprised and then positively surprised to find him there. It's by Charles Ferdinand Ramus. So he's a Swiss author, or he was a Swiss author in the first half of the 20th century. That's where he wrote most of his works. The one that Steve Donohue recommended was called Into the Sun. in English, but I think in French it's Présence de la Mort, which is kind of like a novella length type novel. So this is in the very beautiful La Pléiade edition, so covered in leather, with like a little cover to protect it. The pages are wafer thin, are kind of like almost like Bible paper. So it's kind of like the top type of editions that you can get in French. So very highly with a very high reputation, and they do actually feature Ramu in their lineup. So it's they don't cover all authors, so it's always almost like a little celebration if a new author gets inducted into La Pléiade. I did read another book by Ramu a couple of years ago. It was La Grande Peur dans la Montagne, so The Terror in the Mountain, which I really liked. It was quite surprising in the way that he managed to convey like the psychological terror that filled like a little village in the Swiss mountains. But at the same time, he managed to convey this village life and how people talk to each other very convincingly. So I really liked it. And so I'm actually looking forward to reading more Ramu. He's actually quite unknown in French literature, so you don't really come across him, in libraries or online. But in Switzerland, he's super famous. He's actually on one of the bills, or the Swiss franc bills. He's from, I believe, he's from or he lived in the city where I studied, in Lausanne, in Switzerland, on Lake Geneva. So very nice town if you haven't never been there. And indeed, there are like plaques and streets named after Ramu in Lausanne. So I did come across Ramu while I was studying, but I didn't read him while I was there. I read him later, and hopefully next year. Then moving on. Back to classics. One that I had so I did read the Iliad. I read the Odyssey ages ago, but the one that I didn't read out of the three big ones from classical times is the Aeneid. And so I would like to read the Aeneid next year, especially after reading Dante this year, which where basically Virgil is following Dante, across Inferno and across Purgatory. I thought, well, maybe you should actually read the Aeneid. And I want to read it, especially also because my next book, so now we move to German literature, is by Hermann Broch, The Death of Virgil. So written, I think, towards the end of the Second World War, sorry, and is one of the classics of German literature. So and it talks about actually the death of Virgil, so the last days of his life. I'm actually quite looking forward to this, but I think I should read the Aeneid before reading this. Then another classic of German literature is Thomas Mann. So Thomas Mann, The Magic Mountain, that's the one I read from him. It's fantastic, so you should read The Magic Mountain. It's quite a commitment because it's very long. I also read The Death in Venice, which I liked so. And he wrote a book about him and his dog, which I also quite liked. So I quite like the prose in that one. But it's probably not considered one of his major works. But one that is Dr. Faustus. So where he writes about I think it's a musician who becomes, who has to make a choice whether to align himself with the Nazis, with the regime, or not. So that's why you have this Faustian pact that this musician has to do in the novel. Of course, it's based on Goethe's Faust and all the other Faust type stories that you had beforehand. but it's considered one of his, masterpieces. So I'm actually quite looking forward to that. And then something a bit more contemporary, and yeah, also a bit shorter. So maybe one of those that I'll take for Christmas. It's by Dorothee Elminger, Die Holländerinnen, so the Dutch women. And I don't know anything about it. It did win the 2025 German Book Prize, or at least was nominated or something like that. Maybe it has won. It looks like it won it. Yeah, let's see. So I might actually tackle this now in the coming weeks. Then moving on to Germany adjacent literature, so basically the Netherlands, and then we move to Scandinavia. So in terms of Dutch literature, I honestly just picked this up because there's a dog on it. So it's by Leon de Winter, a Dutch writer, and it's called City of Dogs. And it's about so it's about a brain surgeon that travels to Israel, as he does every year, and then he is asked to do a quite perilous brain surgery while he's there. That's all I know about it, but it has a dog on it, so that's reason enough to read it. Then moving on to Danish literature, another one that I picked because it's quite short. It's actually even shorter than some of the others because also the format is quite small. It's by Olga Raven. It's called The Employees in English. I think it was one of those kind of like trendy books on BookTube a few years ago. Quite experimental. All of it is kind of like little interviews with the employees. There's robots that are in play. There's basically the employees that are on a spaceship and something has happened there. So sounds interesting to me. So this is actually one that I'm quite likely to tackle in the next 2 weeks, just because it's so short. It's probably something that I can read in a few hours. Then sticking to Denmark, there's Solveig Balle on the calculation of volume or something like that. It's another one that's been making the rounds on BookTube, and then has received book prizes and stuff like that. So I think you probably, or you might have seen volume 1 around. So this is volume 1, but in German. The reason I picked the German translations is because overall she's writing 7 of these books, and the German translators are a bit further ahead in translating them. So I decided, well, if I like volume 1, I might want to read all the others in a quick succession. So I want to have all of them. And so I decided to pick the German ones. Plus the German ones actually look quite nice. I think they look nicer than the English versions. So it's also quite small, quite short. And it's about, it's kind of like a Groundhog Day situation. So what's she called? Tara. So the protagonist, Tara, is stuck in a time loop. And so every day she relives the same day. But in contrast to Groundhog Day, she actually can move around in this universe. And so she does. And so some things actually stay with her from, one iteration of the day to the other. So it's not like every day she starts from scratch on the same, wherever she started the previous day. But it's like, if she goes to another room in the house and she sleeps and wakes up, she's in that room. So it's not, she goes back to the other room. So that's kind of like the premise of this kind of like time loop novel. So I'm actually looking forward to reading it. It's been highly praised, and we will see. So time loops sounds interesting to me. Then we're actually sticking to science fiction adjacent, but we're actually moving to Sweden. And this was one that was quite difficult to find. It's called Anyara by Harry Martinson. And so Harry Martinson was a Swedish author who also won the Nobel Prize together with another Swedish author. And it was quite controversial at the time because he won it having been a member of the Swedish Academy either before or maybe still was a member of the Academy. So it was, it had this kind of like smell of corruption there. And he probably was innocent for it. So it sounded to me that it's like the other members wanted to honor him, anyway. It's virtually impossible to find anything by him nowadays. So that just goes to say that Nobel Prize is not really proof that you will have staying power. And so this is kind of like, as you can see, it's one of those reprint houses or like online or print on demand houses that does it. But anyway, so, better have that than nothing. And what it is, so it's called Aniara, and it's actually a science fiction novel, but written in verse. So that's something new. And so when I heard that something like that existed, like a science fiction novel written in verse, I was like, well, I have to get that. And so it's not too long. I'm not sure whether it's a Christmas read. I'm not sure I want to write. I want to read novels in prose, novels in verse during my Christmas holidays. But anyway, something I want to read soon, in 2026 maybe. Another one that I want to read soon, also by a Danish author, is by Stig Dagerman, and it's called Island of the Doomed. And well, really, it's just because it's called Island of the Doomed that I want to read it. So it says here, this novel was unlike any other yet seen in Sweden and would establish him as the country's brightest literary star. To this day, it's a singular work of fiction, a haunting tale that oscillates around 7 castaways as they await their inevitable death on a desert island, populated by blind gulls and hordes of iguanas. Wow, what a perfect Christmas read, isn't it? So maybe not. But anyway, so something that I definitely want to read. Sounds like some kind of cult Swedish novel, and I'm all for cult Swedish novels. Then moving to Sweden's neighbor and to something completely different. So again, something I bought mostly because of the cover, and something that is a bit lighter than Island of the Doomed. It's Palm Beach, Finland, where it's some kind of, it sounds like it's some kind of murder mystery type thing. But I don't really know. It just sounds like a bit wacky, and it looks a bit wacky. It's by Antti Tuomainen. So this is the German translation. I don't know what it's called in an English translation. Presumably also Palm Beach, Finland. But yeah, so just the fact that it's so pink, it's like the pinkest book that's probably ever been published, makes me want to read it. Then, moving away from Scandinavia, where do we move to now? We move to Central Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe. So actually, let's start with this one here. So very tiny thing, maybe one for Christmas, and it's by Greek author Christos Chrysopoulos, translated from the Greek, and it's called The Destruction of the Parthenon. That's all I know about it. But again, it seems like it's an experimental novel. So an experimental Greek novelette. Then I did my video on Hungarian literature, or some Hungarian books that I had in my bookshelves. I'll link to it below. And I think when I was showing that, I actually mentioned this book here. And there's definitely one that I will actually want to read probably next. It's The Finno-Ugrian Vampire. So it's a Hungarian novel by Noemi Szecsi. Probably mispronouncing it. Anyway, so it's a contemporary vampire novel. So the grandma of the main protagonist is a vampire, and that sounds like a nice premise. And well, she lives in Budapest, so a grandma vampire in Budapest, and mayhem ensues, I presume. So I did read Dracula in October, so maybe I'm now in this kind of like vampire phase. Then another Hungarian book that actually caught my attention while I was doing this list of Hungarian novels that I have is actually by Sandor Márai, Embers, in German Die Glut, which is about a mystery between two friends. So two friends meet again after 40 years. So one of the friends confronts the other one about an incident that happened 40 years ago before the other one disappeared, in some kind of like hunting expedition that they had. So the whole novel is about this incident, what actually happened, will we actually know what happened, what are the two friends actually hiding from each other. So that's Embers. It's a classic of Hungarian literature, apparently. Then moving from Hungary to, I think this must be from Croatia. So this is actually one that I believe one of you recommended to me. At least one of you recommended quite a lot of Croatian novels to me, and I got a bunch of them. And this one is actually the one I probably want to read next, just because it has this fancy cover, and it's called Gold, Frankincense, and Myrrh by Slobodan Novak. So I don't know a lot about it. There's also no blurb at the back. There's more kind of like a little excerpt at the back. Blah, blah, blah. So the author was born in Split. So that's on the Croatian coast. He has won Yugoslav and Croatian literary prizes. So published in 1968, Gold, Frankincense, and Myrrh received every major literary award available in Yugoslavia in its day. Okay, well, that's not bad. And so what is it about? It's about the following. So dispossessed of her vast property on the island of Rab by the communist authorities of Yugoslavia, 100-year-old Madonna lies in her deathbed. She's finicky and frail and foul-smelling, a miracle of nature, according to the narrator Mali, because her body continues to function at all. So he looks after her, impatient and exasperated. Yeah. So basically, that's what's about. So we're waiting for this 100-year-old woman to die, and I presume we'll get the family of the history of her family. Then moving to Russia. So I don't think that this coming year will be the year where I'll be reading War and Peace or Dostoevsky. Right now, it all seems a bit too heavy for me. But I do have like a small book from Russian literature that I picked out of my bookshelves here, and that's by Pushkin. It's actually a play, Boris Godunov. I believe it has also been made into an opera and all kinds of things. Boris Godunov is actually a relatively famous figure in Russian history, because he's kind of like in between Ivan the Terrible and then the Romanovs a bit later. So in this kind of like time of troubles after Ivan the Terrible died. And basically, according to the blurb here, so Boris Godunov becomes Tsar. But if you think about it, have you ever heard of a dynasty called Godunov? No? Well, there's a reason. While he's Tsar, so he becomes Tsar after the son of Ivan the Great dies under mysterious circumstances. So the son is called Dmitry, and Dmitry was Tsar before Boris Godunov for a brief time. And so while he's Tsar, there's like another Dmitry that appears and claims he is actually the real Dmitry. It's quite an interesting episode of Russian history. You had like a whole bunch of fake Dmitries that appeared and then wanted to save Russia from whoever was the Tsar at the time. So apparently this play by Pushkin tackles exactly that story. So the story of Boris Godunov and then the fake Dmitry coming up. Then moving to Ukraine. So this is Sergi Jadan. It's called in German Internat. I believe in English it might be called Orphanage. I think it's like his most famous novel. So it's a novel about war, etc. I believe, but it was written before the current war. It was, when was it written? Does it tell me? Yeah, in 2017. So yeah, before the current war. Yeah, so it's very famous. It has received tons of prizes. Probably Sergei Jadan is probably the most famous contemporary Ukrainian writer. But yeah, I haven't read anything from him yet, and it seems like a good place to start. Then, okay, so then one of I have a little reading project for 2026, and that's to finally reading some Polish literature. So I've kind of like circled around it, but I've never actually tackled a Polish novel or work of literature yet. And so that's definitely something I want to change. So I have a bunch here. I'm not saying I'm reading all of them. I might read one of them or maybe another of the Polish books I have. But before all that, I actually plan to read a book on the history of Poland. So this is a one volume book I found. It's a bit dirty, I don't know why. And it's by Adam Zamoyski, Poland: A History. And so just to get a grounding on Polish history. So I know the basics, but like the very, very basics. But hopefully this will give me a bit more grounding. And then after that, so I have 3 books here. So one is a very short one, again, almost like a short story almost. That's how short it is. And it's called The Memoir of an Anti-Hero by Kornel Filipovich. And it's exactly that. It's about like a guy that decides not to be the hero and to actually go with the flow and whatever it takes to actually survive. So it was published in 1961. Masterpiece by one of the great Polish writers of the 20th century. And he asks what it really means to be heroic and what we would do to stay alive. So it takes place during the Second World War in Poland, if I understand this correctly. So interesting, probably not a Christmas read, but definitely, well, it's one that I will probably read just because it's so short. And then I kind of like have 2 that I'm kind of like playing with in my mind. They're both undertakings, so they both probably fall under the category of chunkers. The first one is by Adam Mickiewicz, I believe, something like that, and it's Pan Tadeusz. It's the great epic of Polish literature, written in the early 19th century, when epics were quite popular again in European literature, especially like national epics. And so this is the Polish national epic, basically. So this is if I want to go the more classical route. And if I don't want to go the more classical route, then I'm thinking of reading something by Olga Tokarczuk, so the famous contemporary and Polish writer who won the Nobel Prize. Probably not one of her last ones, which was a little bit, I've seen mixed reviews on that one. And I might actually just go for D1, magnum opus that she wrote, which is the Books of Jacob. So this is the German version, which actually looks quite nice. It's just like absolutely huge. Remember, the German language is usually longer than the English language. It's just a feature of the German language that is actually just longer. That's why you have such huge chunkers. But it's kind of out of the various books that she has, is the one where the premise just interests me the most. It's about this Jewish cult that appeared at some point in the when was it? Yeah, okay, in the 18th century. So yeah, so was he a messiah? Was he a charlatan? He manages to convince a lot of Jewish people in Poland to follow him and to consider him as a messiah. So yeah, so it's basically the story of he is called Jacob Frank. That was his name. That's why it's the books of Jacob. Sticking with long books. Just a second. I was I had a bit of a cold last week, so that's why maybe my voice is a bit raspy as well. My throat is a bit hoarse, so I know we shouldn't be drinking during a video, right, Steve? But I had to do so anyway. Moving to Italy, one that I will most definitely read next year is part 2 of M, Son of the Century. So the fictionalized biography of, well, not the biography, the novel that fictionalizes the life of Mussolini. This is part 2. In German is M, der Mann der Vorsehung. I think in English it must be something like M, the Man of Providence, something like that. It's volume 2. So I don't know whether it has been translated to English. When I originally bought the various volumes, it seemed that only 1 or 2 had been translated, to English, while in German 4 volumes are available. So I decided to buy the German volumes, so the German translations. So I loved M, Son of the Century, so I'll definitely read this. I'm kind of like thinking of reading 1 per year, so for the next 3 years I'll be reading a volume of the life of Mussolini. Then moving to Spanish literature, and starting actually with Latin America. One that I've been toying around with reading is Adolfo Bioy Casares, an Argentinian writer. He was a contemporary and a friend of Jorge Luis Borges. So this is a collection of 5 of his novels. So they're quite short. And I think the most famous one is The Invention of Morel. And that's probably the one I will read. So he has a few others. So I think overall there's 5 or 6 novels in this little volume. But the font is also quite small. So that's why I probably read one and then I'll see. Then moving to Spain itself, the one big figure of 19th century kind of Spanish literature is apparently Benito Pérez Galdós. So he's, I don't know, like the Dickens or whatever, the Balzac, the Essa de Queiroz of Spain. The one reason why I want to read this book is because it's called Meow, which is like fascinating that actually in the 19th century, as an author, as a famous author, you would publish a book just called Meow. But it's kind of like one of those 19th century type novels where you follow like a family and yeah, so there's a family that is known as the Meows because they have a feline appearance. Anyway, so one of those 19th century classics where you follow like a family. So that's Spanish, and then I have quite a bunch of Portuguese books here. Well, actually, I only have 4. So I showed you Saramago before. So Saramago is the one of the most celebrated Portuguese authors of the end of the 20th century. But there's another one, and the other one is actually still alive. They kind of like wrote at the same time, but this one has continued to write. And it's Antonio Lobo Antunes. So also like a very prominent literary figure in Portugal. Actually, you can. This is what he looks like, or what he looked like when he wrote this book, which is, I think, the cover is. I mean, I'm not sure that nowadays we would actually publish covers like this. Nothing against Antonio Loban Tunç, but I'm not sure whether we need his face in so big on the cover. So I'm hesitating between these two. He's actually not an easy. It doesn't have an easy prose style. It's kind of like a stream of consciousness. The Portuguese language can be very long and convoluted, and when you exaggerate with it, it becomes just tricky and difficult to read. He also tends to write in a very colloquial style, which also makes it a bit difficult to read. So I've struggled with his novels in the past. So I've started a few and ended up DNFing them. But yeah, so I have two that I'm considering. So one is this one here. And maybe I'll take off the dust jacket and maybe just read it like this, which looks a bit more pleasant to the eye, like to our 21st century sensibilities. But this is basically The Splendor of Portugal. That's the title of the novel. And this title is taken from the Portuguese national anthem, and it's one of the verses of the national anthem. And he, of course, well, not of course, but he uses it quite sarcastically. So The Splendor of Portugal is actually a novel, as far as I know, about a Portuguese man who had to flee from the colonies, I think from Angola, and then his life in Lisbon or in Portugal, wherever he lives, and contrasting with his previous life in Angola. At least I believe that's what it's about. And it's actually quite not a very well-known aspect of Portuguese history, even in Portugal. But you did have the colonial wars in the end of the 60s and the 1970s, which ended up with the revolution in Portugal itself in 1974. And then the colonies were released into independence. I mean, by the mid-70s, everything else, or almost all the other countries in Africa, had been released into independence. So Portugal was the last holdout, and it was, a colonial war that made no sense, with hindsight, that you would send people there. But this is not about the colonial war itself. This is about all the Portuguese people that had been living as settlers in Angola, in Mozambique, etc. And due to the rushed independence and then the colonial war, obviously they were not really welcome to stay most of the times in Angola or in Mozambique, and then they fled, or they were repatriated to Portugal, and were kind of like uprooted from their settler lives there and had to start new lives in Portugal. So this is what this novel is kind of about. Which is kind of like a bit of a, so it's also not a Christmas novel, but yeah, maybe one I will tackle next year. Or alternatively, because I have quite a few others of Antonio Loban Tunç, maybe like the author of whom I have the most books without having ever managed to finish any of them. But so another option is maybe this one here, for the simple reason that it's called A Morte de Carlos Gardel, so the death of Carlos Gardel. Carlos Gardel was a very famous Argentinian singer, so a singer of tango. I think basically all the famous tangos that you might know are sung by Carlos Gardel. So if you go to Buenos Aires, like you see him like everywhere. There's statues of him and whatnot. So a very famous figure in pop culture in Argentina. Yeah. So the little blurb on the back doesn't tell me what this book is about. But anyway, so just because I like Argentina and have a certain interest for that, I might read this one, even though probably it has nothing to do with Argentina. And then I also have two other books that I bought in Portugal while I was there in the summer. And those are two history books. I'm just showing them to you, but just because they look quite nice. Actually, it's by this Portuguese publisher that publishes books which have kind of like rounded corners and this almost square format. They're very nice. They all come with a bookmark that's aligned with the book cover. So it's a very great idea. I don't know why other publishers don't do that. I mean, printing a little paper bookmark thingy must cost nothing, and I mean it's just amazing. So I think every book should come with, a bookmark that's matching the book cover. In any case, so this is a history of the first Portuguese Republic. So because it says the first Portuguese Republic, you might guess that it's not the current one. But this is the republic that was in place before Salazar took power in the 1930s. And before that, there was like a military dictatorship. So it's basically the history of the republic in the 1910s and 1920s, which was probably the most chaotic time in Portuguese political history, or at least one of the most chaotic times. So it was a very unstable republic. So like one of those where they had 100 prime ministers in a few years or something like that. And so this is the history about that period of time. And as all of these kind of, books about, short-lived republics, what it ends up with is it leads to somebody taking power and then this republic failing, and then you have some autocracy that takes hold. And so that's the next book I have, and that's basically an essay about Salazar. So Salazar was the long-term dictator of Portugal in the 1930s to the 1960s. And so this book is called Salazar and the Power. And it's basically an analysis, kind of like an essayistic analysis of how he took power, why he took power, and why he stayed in power, basically. Especially since he stayed in power after the Second World War. Well, I mean, Portugal didn't participate in the Second World War, at least not as a combatant. So it's basically still shockingly admired nowadays in Portugal. I think there was a poll a few years ago when there was this trend in lots of countries to ask the public for who's your favorite historical person in your history. And so when they did that on Portuguese TV, Salazar came top as the most favored person of Portuguese history, which, well, yeah, it is as it is. Then moving on from, so all of this was, or most of this was from Europe. Now I have a whole pile of stuff that's not from Europe, and maybe actually we start with these ones here. I'll try to speed up a bit. I have Yishai Sarit, Monster. So this is an Israeli novelist who writes in Hebrew. So there's colored edges. This is a German translation, and it's basically about an Israeli tour guide in, I think, in Auschwitz or in one of the death camps. There's an incident in this, as he's giving a tour, which makes him reconsider why he's a tour guide there, and basically it's a reflection then on the Holocaust, but from the perspective of this tour guide in Auschwitz. Then I have two books from Africa, one in English. So this is one that actually was I saw first on Steve Donohue's channel. Slow Poison is about the Ugandan state, so the times of Idi Amin and then his successor Yoweri Museveni, who I believe is still the president of Uganda. So it's basically a recent history of Uganda from someone who has actually been in Uganda and followed it quite closely. So the author is Mahmoud Mamdani. And then I also have a novel and this is Orome by Balu Girma. Orome, sorry, is or was written in Ethiopian. Well, actually, in Amharic. So in Amharic, so one of the languages of Ethiopia. So it's, I think, one of the rare books from an Ethiopian language, or actually from a native African language. Sorry, that has been translated to English. So, apologies. And so when Balu Girma wrote this novel in the 1980s, it was the time when Ethiopia was ruled by a communist dictatorship, kind of like a communist junta. After he published this book, which was critical and satirical about, the political situation of Ethiopia, he disappeared, and he has never reappeared since. So that also gives this novel a bit of a tragic, halo. No, sorry for that. Yeah, I'll speed up to come to an end. So something from Persian literature, Nizami Ganjawi's Khosrow and Shireen. The reason I'm looking to read this is because it was featured very prominently in Orhan Pamuk's My Name is Red, which I adored when I read it this year. So it's a classic of Persian literature. Then moving on to Chinese literature. There's two books I have here. So first of all, Lu Xun, which is a collection of short stories by Lu Xun. So I've read one of them, but probably I would like to read some of the other short stories. Lu Xun is really one of the great figures of modern Chinese literature. So he lived kind of like, or he wrote kind of like in 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, like around that period. And he kind of like revolutionized or modernized Chinese literature. In addition to short stories, so he didn't write novels, as I believe, but he did write a lot of essays, a lot of literary analysis and all kinds of stuff. So he was really like a major intellectual figure in China in the early 20th century. And then to something more contemporary, Mo Yan, so the Nobel Prize winner, so the only one from China so far. I read a book from Mo Yan a few years ago, which was The Republic of Liquor. And it was very experimental. Actually, yeah, one of those experiences that you, where you, after reading the book, you feel like, wow, I've never read something like that. So really very good. I really like that. And so I've been planning for some time to actually read another book by Mo Yan. So I have a few lying around, but this is the one that kind of like appeals to me at the moment. I think in English it's called Sandalwood Death. In German is, so this is the German translation, Die Sandelholzstrafe. And it's about the Boxer Rebellion, so in that time period, so end of the 19th century. And it's about the last person who has to suffer the sandalwood death, which is a death punishment, and a very cruel and bloodthirsty one. And so we have the story about that, and presumably reflections about that. Then something completely different, something I picked up while I was in Singapore recently. It's relatively contemporary Thai novel by Viraporn Initi Prapha, the female author. The book is called The Blind Earthworm in the Labyrinth, and it was kind of like a literary sensation in Thailand when it was published. So, again, quite short. Actually, this might make it into the Christmas pile. Moving on to Japan. One that I've been planning to read for a long time, and I think 2026 will be the year when I finally read it, is by Yukio Mishima, The Temple of the Golden Pavilion. So I've been to the Temple of the Golden Pavilion in Kyoto. It's magnificent. You've probably seen pictures of it. It's like this temple completely covered in gold leaf. That temple was actually burned down in the 1950s, 1940s, something like that, by a crazed monk. And so there's the story about that. So why would someone actually go and put fire into one of the most beautiful works of architecture in Japan? Then something a bit more classical, but also from Japanese history, Japanese literature. It's by Natsume Soseki. I Am a Cat. So this is the French translation, Je suis un chat. And it's basic. So it's, Soseki is kind of like the great literary figure from the end of the 19th century, early 20th century in Japan. Again, one that modernized Japanese literature. And I Am a Cat is written from the perspective of a cat. So the cat that actually tells the story. Again, I'm not sure whether there had been any other novels like that. Probably not, or at least they're not really well known, but Soseki's I Am a Cat is quite well known. Then moving to Korea. I still haven't read Han Kang, so The Vegetarian. Not too long compared to some of the others on this pile here. Yeah, maybe this goes on to the Christmas pile. And so this is The Vegetarian. I think I don't need to say anything about it. It's like super well known. But alternatively for Korea, I also have something that's a bit more of a thriller. It's called The Good Son, in this quite striking cover, and it's by Yo Jong. Apologies if I mispronounce it. So I'll just read you a little bit from the blurb in the back. Eugene is a model student, a successful athlete, and a good son. But one day he wakes up covered in blood. There's no sign of a break-in, and there's a body downstairs. It is the body of someone he knows all too well. It actually does sound like a Christmas read, so I might actually focus on this rather than on The Vegetarian. Might be not quite as high literary as The Vegetarian by Han Kang, but I'm kind of like more drawn to this one at the moment. And then to finish, two more difficult undertakings. But anyway, I'm not promising that I will get to them, but they kind of like struck my fancy. First of all, this is from Arabic classical literature. This is by Ibn Khaldun, the Book of Examples, or the Muqaddimah. So Ibn Khaldun is kind of like the great classical historian in Arabic literature. So before we really had, or before history was really a thing in Europe. I don't remember exactly when he was living, and it doesn't say here in the back. But yeah, kind of like in the golden age of Arabic literature. And so he wrote actually this book called the Muqaddimah, which is like his philosophy on historiography, how you should write a history book. And then it's followed by like history of kind of like a collection of the histories that he had access to. But the part that's well known nowadays is this introduction, so this Muqaddimah. So I mean, still big enough. And so I might dig into this as kind of like my 2026 Arabic venture. And then last but not least, so we haven't tackled India yet, and one that I planned to read this year, but I didn't get to it, so I'm kind of like moving it to 2026, is Arjuna and the Hunter by Bhairavi. So the classic of Indian literature. Believe it's translated from what language is it? Is it from the Sanskrit? Yeah, it seems like it's from the Sanskrit. So this is by the Multiclassical Library, so an imprint of Harvard University Press. And like the Loeb Classics and these other ones that they have, it's bilingual, so you have the Sanskrit on one page and then the English translation on the other side. So I don't read Sanskrit, but it's still nice to see it. So nice that it's acknowledged and that nowadays you can get actually books printed in the West that actually feature Sanskrit script. And so this multi-classical library features not only Sanskrit, but they kind of like tackle all the languages from the Indian subcontinent, so including Urdu and Sindhi from Pakistan nowadays, but also the Dravidian languages in southern India. I chose this one here because a lot of the epics and things that they have translated are multi-volume, while this one is more contained. It's like a single volume. And so yeah, so it's about Arjuna. So Arjuna is one of the figures from the Mahabharata, so one of the 5 Pandava brothers. So it's basically the most well, I wouldn't say the most warrior-like one, but it's kind of like the hunter type stealthy warrior one. So he's also the one who's featured in the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the Mahabharata originally, and where he discusses with Krishna. So yeah, anyway, so Bharavi takes like an episode, which is this Arjuna and the hunter, and then recreates his own version of it. This has happened quite a lot in Indian literature, as I understand, so that episodes from the Mahabharata are like taken up by other authors, later authors, and then they write their own epics on like episodes of the Mahabharata. So something that I'll probably tackle in 2026, but probably not a Christmas read. So I'm seeing, well, we've gone on over an hour, so sorry if this is a bit long. I'll try to put like little timestamps in the video, at least for the big chunks of the video. I probably won't be doing videos over the next few weeks, just because I'll be with my family and we'll be relaxing there. So in any case, I wish you a Merry Christmas, or if you don't celebrate Christmas, happy festive season, Happy New Year, and then I hope to see you again in new videos in the next year. Thank you, BookTube. Bye.